Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine war news update for the 13th of March 2024. Goodness me, there's so much information to impart to you. We've really hit a rich seam of news lately, and today is no different. There's a lot of activity last night, there was a lot, and there's a lot of analysis to do. So get on with it, Pearce. Okay. Just to let you know that there might be a bit of content today, as per yesterday. Goodness. Okay. And just to add to that, it's because almost certainly we're 4 days away from the Russian presidential election. So expect this week to be pretty mental. One of my commenters last night said, I'm going to go to bed now and I can't wait to wake up to one of your videos tomorrow morning. And that's when I whacked out another breaking news. Like, you don't have to wait till tomorrow morning, mate. It's out now. Okay, so yesterday, Ukrainian General Staff figures said of the Russian losses that there were 980 personnel lost. You can find all the caveats to these figures in the description below. 980 is another huge day of personnel losses. 5 tanks, okay, less than we have seen, but still going to hurt the Russians a wee bit there. 20 APVs, 32 artillery systems, just consistently high numbers there and above average. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. And then we have 62 vehicles and fuel tanks, just phenomenal numbers of vehicles that are being taken out. And yes, these might be cars, SUVs, trucks, ATVs, quads, golf carts that they're using, but all of these are bits of equipment that the Russians are using. They are going to almost invariably have personnel inside them when they are hit. These hits are causing the Russians a lot of issue. Right, 8 pieces of special equipment can also be added to the list. So another tough day for the Russians. These figures, even when they are in the middle of the ranges, as you can see for artillery and armored personnel vehicles, are still really... 32 artillery pieces to lose in a day is massive, right? If, of course, it is anywhere near that as a total. But even if you took a third off there, you're still losing 20-odd pieces of artillery in a day. Right. Andrew Perpetual's lost stats as he and his team surveys the socials. Again, you can just see that when these kind of figures that are claimed by the General Staff are mapped, at least in proportion, by what we see as visual evidence. Remember that each one of these is evidence in Andrew's original data sheet in his Google Doc with the visual confirmation of those claims. So these are visually confirmed losses or damaged or whatever, and you can see here from the ratios that the Russians are losing 3 to 4 times what the Ukrainians are losing here. That is a good day from the Ukrainians. That's what they need. They need days like this every single day. The other thing worthy of note is the number of destroyed pieces of kit there. So the brown ones and abandoned in black, they are significant, not just like the light damage. They're destroyed or abandoned later to be hit again, possibly. So the Russians there have just lost a lot more stuff than the Ukrainians. Right, okay, let's look at the Ukrainian losses. There's a decoy there, so you can take that off, a HIMARS decoy, hit by missile strike. Andrew does say leaning towards a decoy. It's sometimes very difficult to tell, especially from when the Russians hit things with particularly missiles. The spotter drone is usually quite far away. They're usually using a proper reconnaissance drone that is having to spot that from quite a distance, and it means it's very difficult to work out whether it's a decoy or not. But if it's not a decoy, then they have lost to HIMARS. So that could be significant. Right. Surveillance comms, 2 boats, a couple of M777 howitzers. Then we have, as one of the tanks, a Stridsvagn 122, which is abandoned. That's the Leopard 2A5, the Swedish variant. Some people saying, I think Andrew said before that he thinks that's basically the best tank that the Ukrainians have. So given all the main battle tanks they've been provided by the West, that could be the best one, the Swedish upgrade to the Leopard 2A5. We have 3 BMP-1s, a couple of M113 APCs, Humvees, and whatnot, and then a bunch of SUVs. So fairly average losses in terms of value. That Stridsvagn will be a bit of a sore point for the Ukrainians. And when we look at the Russian losses, included in there is that the IL-76 that was lost in or northeast of Moscow at Ivanovo. Then two Buk M1s, air defense systems taken out by Gimla and an FPV drone. Surveillance and comms equipment, recovery vehicle, another Brem lost there or damaged. A suite of artillery pieces, including yet another 240mm Tulip, the self-propelled mortar. We have a number of different tanks, and not too many, and then it's the infantry fighting vehicles that are taking up just the largest proportion of these losses. BMP 1s, BMP 3s, and then a number of other ones as well, BTRs and whatnot. Really significant number of losses there. Interesting to see such a large number of BMP 1s in that list. And a lot of those destroyed and abandoned, the majority destroyed and abandoned. And then the same for APCs, a lot of those, and a lot of those destroyed and abandoned, MTLBs mainly, a couple of BTRs in there. And then we have trucks and civilian vehicles and that Desert Cross golf cart there as well. So just a huge mass of equipment that the Russians have lost, incredibly high value when you add it all together. And especially if you're going to include that Il-76. And if that had, so I think the claim is that 15 crew were on board, and if those 15 crew were, training for A50s or just in and of themselves crew members of Il-76, you are taking out a huge air capability in terms of the personnel as opposed to the actual airframe. In fact, when we look at that situation with the Il-76, Spartan News here says 2 A50s have got shot down with a combined crew of 30 on board. So all hands lost. That's what's happened previously. Then it could be that you start training new crew on the Il-76 to fill recent job openings. And then the engine falls off that. And that goes down with, as he claims, 16 recruits here. I don't know. I thought I heard 15, but maybe 16. All hands lost. I mean, it's not good for Russian crew capability there. According to Russian sources, says PS01, the passengers on the crashed Il-76 were operators of the A-50 AWACS, since the Severny airfield in Ivanovo is the location of the A-50 aircraft. Again, if they are training or crew members for the A-50 usually, then that is a huge loss. Unconfirmed, says Will Teal here, but oh goodness. So they sent an A-50 crew up to pick up another A-50 to return it to Taganrog to replace the ones that were damaged last week on that Il-76, and it effing had a bird strike and crashed. Do I have that right? So this is completely unconfirmed though. We don't know the accuracy of the source. This is basically, as said here, unconfirmed Telegram chatter at that point. It could be just coming from Ukrainians that are hoping that to be the case. But if that rumor is true and they have lost an A-50 crew, that is absolutely phenomenal. Just really bad news for Russians. But that's just Telegram chatter. Okay, talking about other losses, the Ukrainians, the Russians, pro-Ukrainian Russians, have had these incursions into Belgorod and Kursk regions. Here is one at a border crossing just over the border, where the Russians took out one of the pro-Russian Ukrainian tanks there. The tank track came off. Let's have a look at it. Yep, you can see it there. There's a tank track. Anyway, there are claims going both sides of Russians claiming they've taken lots of Ukrainian, I will call them Ukrainian, but you know what I mean, the Russian Volunteer Corps, taken out loads of Ukrainian equipment, and the Ukrainians saying, no, you haven't, we're still in there. And it's this information match at the moment. But we'll come back to that in the other section a bit later, because there's a lot more on those claims. Right, undated video of the Russian S-400 air defense unit defending itself from a Ukrainian attack with possibly HIMARS or Gimler's rockets. S-400's transporter erector launcher, TEL, can be seen firing a number of missiles against the targets in the sky. In the later part of the video, the sounds of at least 2 Gimler's impacts can be heard in the close distance. A cameraman sits inside the early warning and acquisition radar system. According to the original source, one S-400 TEL was lightly damaged, while one S-400 TEL operator was lightly wounded. And interesting footage. And you can, it's interesting because you just see these S-400 missiles just firing out. Significant. And it's just, and what could be significant here is that I may have missed it there, but you know, if a missile lands close, there you go. So 2 missiles then land close to that TEL, and you're thinking, did the S-400, was it unable to shoot down those HIMARS? So that's significant. What's the cost of the S-400? How many S-400 missiles do the Russians have to be able to keep doing stuff like that? It's exactly the same as the Russians with the Ukrainians in their Shahed and missile strikes across Ukraine over the last couple of years, in trying to exhaust Ukrainian air defense missile numbers. Well, it's the same here. Where do the Russians stand with what they're able to do? But it's just interesting to see those S-400 missiles go up. Right, this lots of footage about coming out, as mentioned, from these incursions across the border, these what I think are raids, but actually one of them might not be a raid. It might be a genuine attempt to take some land, and we'll talk about that in a second. So new RDK, so the Russia, well, you got the Russian Volunteer Corps, which is this one, showing the extensive use of FPV drones to weaken Russian defense. So they are using FPV drones across the border really effectively, it appears, to take out Russian vehicles. And troop transports and whatnot, and then being in action this morning. So they still seem to be, you know, working fine across the border, despite what the Russians are claiming. So anyway, just to mention, there's various bits of footage coming out to show activity and losses on both sides. Right, now we get on to distance munitions. There's a heck of a lot to talk about. Okay, so the first thing is that the Ukrainians shot down 17 out of 22 Shahed type drones last night, as far as I can work out. Not too much detail on those. Obviously, 5 still getting through is going to cause some kind of issue somewhere. These were in Mykolaiv, Khmelnytsky, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kherson. But don't know too much about those. There's more information coming out on everything else that's happened. So first of all, we're going to go back to what took place inside Ukraine, from Russia's retaliation to oil refineries being hit yesterday, 2 strikes on St. Petersburg, and then other things happening that we probably don't have information about, and then the Il-76 going down. And it seemed that the Russians reacted to that because they just flung 3 S-300 surface-to-air missiles that don't have great accuracy, but they are very difficult to shoot down. Flung 3 of them into Kharkiv, causing damage, apparently targeting old hangars near the city. So there's evidence that they were causing quite a bit of consternation to those in Kharkiv Oblast. And then Kryvyi Rih was hit yesterday. Oh dear, daily missile fired at Kryvyi Rih. It has actually got through air defences. An apartment block has been hit. There are likely to be casualties. Quite a lot of discussion about this. A lot of people really upset. At least 2 people have been killed, I think, likely to rise. I think it's 4 now. Local officials say there were at least 3 hits from enemy missiles, including a direct hit on a 9-story building. Again, these are strikes. They look like direct strikes on residential buildings. These are not military targets in Kryvyi Rih for sure. First video, the Kryvyi Rih attack, 2 dead, many injured. Attack latest, close-up shot of the damage to a 9-story apartment block this evening. And then, you know, lots more photos coming out from there. And in fact, there is now imagery from inside a building as it was hit. 3 missiles hit the city. 30 people have been taken to hospital. 5 serious, fighting for their lives. One of whom is a child. In fact, I think 10 children were injured. Another rocket hit the roof of a 5-story building in the metallurgy district of Kryvyi Rih. People aren't happy with this. So Andrew Perpetua gets really annoyed, rightly so, at Russian terrorism when they attack these residential buildings. So Russian terrorism killed 3 and wounded 38 so far. Obviously, full numbers will take time. 10 of the victims were children. Just it's not cool. And this is Kryvyi Rih now, by the way. So not happy with those strikes, especially as they appear not to have any other intention other than terrorism. Unless they're just really inaccurate missiles, but they seem to be flinging them into residential districts. So over 300 apartments were damaged in these missile attacks, according to Tim White. 2 women and a man were killed, while almost 50 were injured. 2 of them aged just 2 months and 11 months. Hashtag Russia's terrorist state. And here, a video of the first moments of the attack on a residential building in Kryvyi Rih, filmed by police. 4 people died. So on and so forth. That's what happened in Kryvyi Rih. Then the Russian drone attacks destroyed a apartment building in Sumy, injuring 8, with more missing. 5-story apartment building in Sumy was hit, and it looks like it's pretty much collapsed. So that's difficult stuff happening in Sumy. So just to give you an idea from next. During the night, as a result of Russian attacks, high-rise buildings in 3 Ukrainian cities were destroyed, Interior Minister Klimenko said. In Mirnohrad, Donetsk region, a missile partially destroyed a 5-story residential building. 2 people were killed, 4 were wounded. In Sumy, 30 apartments were damaged in a 5-story building, 15 of them destroyed. 10 people were rescued from under the rubble. 8 of them were injured to varying degrees of severity. There are victims. Their number is being specified. In other words, I think they're dead. The death toll from the missile strike on Kryvyi Rih has risen to 4 people. Total number of dead and injured more than 50. So pretty harsh attacks, pretty horrific attacks on Ukraine. And then this morning, just now, news that a missile has been fired at Odessa. Local military authority doesn't specifically say the rocket was destroyed, while one pro-Russian channel reports 2 explosions near the port. So I guess we'll get more information later. Now, that's what's been happening as a result of these. Well, maybe as a result of these Ukrainian attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, or maybe just that's what they were going to do. Let's talk, before we look at what's happened in the last 12 hours, loads of information with regard to further strikes on Russian oil infrastructure. This is regarding yesterday's attacks on oil infrastructure and the analysis that came out from that. So Chris Owicki says this is a lot more damaging than it might seem at first glance, because Russia's oil industry relies on sanctioned Western technology. So go and look at Joe Blogg's videos on this. He did one yesterday. Exactly the same kind of conclusions. They don't have the expertise anymore in Russia because of the sanctions. So people like ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, they pulled out of Russia and pulled out with them individual, like human expertise and tech expertise without being able to supply parts to the Russian oil industry. They are basically extracting oil and gas, not as efficiently and not as well as they would be able to, but also more expensively than they would otherwise be doing. So it is not easy for them, even without these strikes. And you add these strikes in, and it is particularly difficult. So this is a lot more damaging than it might seem. In a single drone attack, Ukraine has taken out 5% of Russia's oil refining capacity. Russian oil industry is following the Black Sea Fleet. So this is regarding one in Nizhny Novgorod, which, as you can see here, an oil refinery in Nizhny Novgorod region has suffered such damage that the plant will not operate at full capacity now. OSINT investigator Neon Handrail has established the drone's point of strike. The fire broke out right at the vacuum units. Moreover, according to local authorities' explanation, the oil refining equipment caught fire. The plant produces 11% of all Russian gasoline, and the annual refining capacity is 16 to 17 million tons of Russian oil. This is really significant stuff, right? And then, of course, there's the one at Oriel that was also hit yesterday. Now, there are claims that and you would absolutely expect this, that the Ukrainians will know exactly what they are going to hit at these oil refineries, right? They are hitting particular points that will cause the most damage. There is also evidence that, and the ones today, that there's just no air defense, that they're just freely able, it appears, to just fly up to these things and blow up what they like. All you need is just more, like I said yesterday, you just need more and more of these. And then what happened today? More and more of these. They are hitting these with a greater number of drones and more frequently, it seems. So the Guardian yesterday reporting on this: Ukraine disrupts production at Russian refinery in cross-border strikes on oil facilities. Talking about both Oriol and Nizhny Novgorod, produces nearly 6% of Russia's total refined crude oil, and another hitting an oil depot with petroleum products in the city of Oriol. Quote, the special services are working at the site using all the necessary force and means to localize the fire at one of the oil refining installations, said the Nizhny Novgorod governor. So yeah, Kiev has concentrated fire on Russian refineries and energy facilities in recent months, and Russia has been forced to ban the export of petrol for 6 months in order to control domestic prices, while shortages have been exacerbated by outages at major refineries. So, goodness me, you've got gasoline or petrol shortages within Russia, and this is one of the biggest producers of this stuff. So it's quite incredible, and they've banned exporting it for very good reason, because their infrastructure has been successfully hit by the Ukrainians. So some figures: the drone hit so this is yesterday at the which one? Oh no, this is possibly going on today's one. So we'll come to this in a second, but it's just important here. The drone hit a cracking tower, which would be an expensive and difficult to replace piece of kit. It's complex, and it's not like they've got spares lying around. Damaging towers will affect the refinery's ability to produce lighter fractions, gasoline and diesel. So that goes to the point that they know what they're kind of aiming at. Now, although it will take many more attacks on refineries to create a real gasoline shortage in Russia, and even then Belarus has available capacities, it is an effective strategy for many reasons. One, gasoline shortage would be a political nightmare for Putin because it would be felt and discussed by everyone. Gasoline prices are political, even in Russia. I mean, think about this in the US, how political gas prices are there. Wow. It's in Russia, this is going to be the same. Average Russians are not willing to pay a price for the war. Two, refineries are important for the military. Of course, the military will not feel shortages, but refineries are legitimate targets. Three, there are very few civilian casualties. High gas prices make people angry, but nobody will starve, freeze, etc. due to the attacks. Attacks on Russian refineries don't lead to rising oil prices globally as long as crude exports continue. So these are the refining and storage facilities for these. So as long as crude oil, like the crude, the basic raw oil material, doesn't get affected, then actually that's not going to affect everyone else around the world. This is more affecting domestic refined oil products. Is the claim here. Attacks on Russian refineries don't lead to rising oil prices globally as long as crude exports continue. The effect is only felt by Russians. 5. The damages can take several months to repair. Sanctions and drone attacks work hand in hand here, as well as Western parts are more difficult to obtain for aforementioned reasons. Ukraine has just scratched the surface of what can be done here. Russia will try countermeasures, but probably will remain vulnerable. P.S. A technicality: in the Russian case, rationing of gasoline would be more likely than really high prices. The latter are tightly regulated. Okay, now we're going to move on to basically what's happened for the last 12 hours overnight, and actually going on into today, as you can see from footage. Russian Defense Ministry has said that 65 Ukrainian drones were destroyed by air defense systems over the past night and morning. Of course, the Russians claim they have destroyed all the drones. The problem is here that footage suggests very clearly that that is not the case, right? So again, Russians are lying, and we know that 100%. The ministry said 11 drones were shot down over the Belgorod region, 8 over Bryansk, 29 over Voronezh, 8 over the Kursk region, and 1 over the Ryazan and Leningrad regions. Then there was an additional report that 7 more drones were shot down in the morning over Belgorod and Voronezh regions. So there you can see the type of drone that's been used in at least one instance. So more than 30 drones then have now, because of the addition of those other ones, been destroyed overnight over the Russian Voronezh region. Russian media reported the likely target of the drones was a military airfield located 4 kilometers south of the town of Bertolinovka. So, okay, they might have destroyed them all, but let's see. Anton Gerashchenko says Russia was under another massive drone attack last night. Russian media report, and this is exactly what it's predicting. This is bound to happen, which is as soon as Ukraine get the capability of manufacturing large numbers of these drones, if they can make them at scale, you're just going to see them being used as much as possible against such targets. So what happened last night? Ryazan oil refinery was under attack. A fire is being extinguished. About 30 drones attacked Voronezh region. A transformer substation was damaged in Bertolinovsky district, and the roof of a store was destroyed in Sovetsky district. Also, the governors of Kursk, Belgorod, Bryansk regions reported attacks by 6 to 8 drones each. And of course, we're not going to see the full effect of these drone strikes because some of the footage will be will not get out. In addition, a drone was destroyed in the Krishishki district, Leningrad region, while an approach to the Kirishi petroleum organic synthesis. Authorities say that production is operating in normal mode. There are no casualties or damage. The consequences at the site of the crash have been localized and eliminated. According to Russian Defense Ministry, 58 drones attacking different regions of the country were allegedly intercepted in Russia from night until morning, namely 11 drones over Belgorod, 8 over Bryansk, 29 Voronezh, and 8 over Kursk. Of course, more have now been seen, and there's plenty of footage actually coming out of these strikes on the oil facilities. Meanwhile, Belgorod was targeted overnight with a series of drones. That was more in the nighttime, and then today we can see that the FSB building has been attacked, although I think it's only light damage. But the FSB building attacked by drones in Belgorod. And then Volgodonsk in the Rostov Oblast. So on top of all of what you just heard, it appears that the Russian air defense was working in Rostov Oblast, which is down much closer to the Sea of Azov. What's on the Sea of Azov to the north, very northeast. And you've got Mariupol, Berdyansk, Mariupol, Taganrog, and Rostov. And then obviously in that oblast, you've got Volgodonsk. Russian air defense is trying to shoot down unknown drones. Rostov MPP nuclear power plant is located just north of this town. I doubt they're aiming at the nuclear power plant. More videos of Ukrainian kamikaze drones striking the Ryazan oil refinery is just an absolute ton of footage. You can go and find it all. This is burning oil refineries. You get the picture. Now, what's interesting here, this is a clear video at the moment when one of the Ukrainian Lyutyi long-range attack drones hit the Ryazan naft product oil depot in the Russian city of Ryazan in the morning of March the 13th. So, the first thing to notice here is that you have a drone that is just unopposed. There's no air defense. You've got air raid sirens, but this drone is effectively circling, looking for the right target to hit, circles, and then goes down and hits it. There it goes, down there, and then you see the explosion. And you hear the explosion. So that's Ryazan, and you very clearly see these long-range drones. It claims it's a Mugen 5 here, but then corrects it to say actually it's not. It's a Lyutyi produced by Ukroboronprom, the Ukrainian the public sector industrial defense manufacturer. Goodness me, I can't get my words out. But yeah, just so much going on all around Russia. Now, according to Russian sources, 68 drones flew over 7 regions. Here's the example in Voronezh. These are relatively cheap drones, and it's a way to exhaust Russian air defense systems, exactly what we heard with the Russians trying it on Ukraine. And then Ukrainian drones hit their targets with virtually no air defense. The Russian air defense is totally overwhelmed or overstretched. Russia's oil and gas pipeline and refinery industry is a sitting duck in a shooting gallery, says Tendar, as plenty more footage comes out of particularly the Ryazan oil refinery get hit. And you're going to see this, I'm sure, tomorrow night. And I'm sure the night after. I mean, if I was Ukraine, I'd just be like, build, 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 fire, fire, fire. And the Russians are going to have to make a decision. How are they going to protect these refineries? It's exactly what I've been saying the last however long. You have a very big country with a huge geographical range there. And you have these positioned all around. They aren't clumped together. And so you can't have an economy of scale with protecting lots of different infrastructural points with a set of air defenses. You have to protect that refinery and that refinery over there and this one over here, and each of them will need their own separate air defense units, pieces of equipment. How does Russia deal with that? Because they won't have enough to defend everything. So they are going to have to give up some of these refineries, I think, to the vagaries of whether Ukraine is going to hit it or not. They are, or they pull air defenses from the front line. And then what does that mean in terms of air defense capabilities on the front line? They don't have the capacity to defend such a vast country with all the targets that sit inside that. Why this hasn't happened so far is because the West has not provided weaponry to Ukraine that they can use inside Russia, right? So they've been unable to use Western supplied equipment to do this. And they've had to wait 2 years to build up their industrial capabilities to be able to produce at scale. Now, we've seen over the last 2 years them occasionally throw in, particularly like those beaver drones and whatnot, occasionally throw drones in and cause problems in Leningrad region, in St. Petersburg, or maybe over here in Moscow. Remember, they've hit inside Moscow and caused all sorts of problem. And you're thinking, goodness me, that's just the odd drone here and there. Well, what's going to happen when they have scale? This is what happens when they have scale. And I just think this is great news going forward for Ukraine. The challenge is and I did a whole video on this called the Putin paradox, is the better you do, the better that Ukraine does against Russia, the more likely it is that Putin's going to do something mental. So it's almost like a bit of a dilemma there, that if you do well, you could end up being absolutely hammered by a nuclear explosion or whatever. But if you don't do well, then you lose. So, like, that's your dilemma. It's a bit of a sort of paradox. You like, the better you do, the worse you do. So I call that the Putin paradox. And indeed, what did we hear yesterday? Putin is threatening nuclears again. This shows that this is hurting Putin. This is hurting Russia. And he knows it. Right, we're going to go and look in other bits and pieces at what's been going on with these incursions into Russian territory from the pro-Ukrainian Russian units. So Suriyat Maps is communicating this as being completely repelled and expelled by the Russians. So Ukrainian army launched a new offensive on 4 axes after a brief initial success in the militia, which entered the localities of Tetkino, Kozinka, Lozoya Rudka, Novaya Tavozhanka, and Nekotiva. The Russian troops regrouped and launched a counterattack, being able to completely reverse the situation and expelling the militants from the Russian territory. It's very clear what Suriyat Map says here. Today's events had a purely propaganda objective, that of liberating the Belgorod and Kursk Oblasts and showing the Russian border guards as inefficient and ineffective in defending Russian territory. However, this operation has been less successful than its predecessor last year, and the result has been a heavy blow to the Free Russian Army militias, who have suffered significant human and material losses. Nor has it been the strategic effect of forcing the Russian command to send reinforcements to this area. But there are already significant troops deployed to the border and in the rear, guaranteeing the deterrent effect, but on the opposite side. The battle continues on Ukrainian soil. So, okay, Suriyat Maps is selling this as a complete success for the Russians in rebutting the pro-Ukrainian Russian forces here. The problem is that that's not true. Like, the Freedom of Russia Legion fighters claim to have liberated a part of the village of Tetkino in Kursk region. They add that the streets are being shelled heavily, but they intend to move forward. And that is coming out today. Right, so there's footage coming out today, which I presume shows that as Tim White says, Russia's rebels still hold Tetkino in Kursk region this evening. That's last evening. The Free Russian Legion spokesperson told Ukraine's news telethon this evening and predicted a tough night ahead. But there are claims that they are there this morning. Russian Volunteer Corps then brings out like footage of drones. Russians have admitted their own losses. At least 4 Russian Guard servicemen were killed, 9 injured, with incidents involving drone attacks and a destroyed tank. Russian Defense Ministry personnel were wounded, and a private security service member was injured in missile and drone attacks. So they're admitting like a little bit of damage there to their own forces. Now, as mentioned, there's very heavy shelling going on. Not as mentioned, but there is very heavy shelling going on in Belgorod at the moment. Addressed to the commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps 12 hours ago, White Rets Kapustin. So a bit of a interesting character, that one, I had to admit. To the inhabitants of the Russian Federation, quote, "The main task of the Corps is and will be the dismantling of the Kremlin regime, and we will make our raids deep into the territory of the Russian Federation time after time, attracting more and more supporters. It is especially important for us to speak out on the eve of the fast called, scare quotes, elections. And officially aligned Russian channels are focusing on stating that the sabotage groups that entered Russia yesterday belong to the Ukrainian armed forces rather than emphasizing their Russian nationality." So the propagandists and those reporting this inside Russia are saying that these guys are they're not really focusing on the fact that they're actually Russian, just selling them as being Ukrainian. Right. What's interesting about this particular place, Tetkino, and why the pro-Ukrainian Russians might still be there is the very interesting geographical context here. So this is a kind of weird area that is like a pocket inside an equalized Ukrainian border, if you like. And as a result, the Ukrainians basically surround it anyway, just by nature of the border. And what makes it even more difficult for the Russians to retake is that one side is covered by a river. And so actually, the only way the Russians can come back through here is from one area, from the north. So if you can hammer that with artillery from both sides here, and even behind, the Russians are going to struggle to take Tetkino back. So the idea that the RDK or whoever have been flushed out of here, it might be correct. There might be no pro-Ukrainians left there. But the reality is it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to do that. Now, as Astraea Intel does in a bit of analysis, okay, but what if it's not a raid? So a raid is you go in, do some stuff, and then you get out of Dodge, right? So raids are not a case of staying there and taking territory and causing a problem in that respect. Okay, what if it's not a raid? Let me elaborate on the strategic brilliance behind choosing this location. The path back to the settlement is so narrow and predictable that any offensive force would be annihilated by Ukrainian artillery that is set up around the salient. And it's not really a salient, it's just the way that the border is set up. I literally cannot exaggerate the massive boost in the efficiency of artillery support under these conditions. On a head-on charge, success is impossible for the Russians. Holding this territory doesn't require a large number of troops either. Now, the brilliance of the situation becomes apparent. For the Russian forces to recapture the settlement that is controlled by the opposition, they must enter Ukrainian territory to neutralize the massive advantage of the opposition that is offered by Ukrainian artillery. Once again, once within Ukrainian borders, they find themselves facing Ukrainian elements with all the machines, artillery, and numbers that those Ukrainian elements have. So, in other words, if they want to really properly liberate, I guess, Tetkino, then they have to get into Ukrainian territory, which means they come up against the bona fide Ukrainian forces. The line of contact is shaped in a manner that compels the Russians to re-enter Ukrainian-controlled territory if they hope to launch an assault on the settlement. Without the Ukrainians themselves entering Russian territory, they have forced the Russians to come to them. Again, this could indeed be another raid, but if it's not, then the positions of the RDK are absolutely tenable. All the manpower in the world, all the armour and air support will matter little if the artillery around the salient is not dealt with. So it's just really interesting. It's covered by a river in the north and the Ukrainian border from the south and west. Pretty self-explanatory with the map. The Russians can only attack it from the northeast unless they want to widen the front and attack other Ukrainian cities across the border in that sector. Boom, says Astraea Intel. That's the brilliance. Force the Russians to come to us in the north, pull their resources from elsewhere. This settlement cannot be besieged even if there were no Ukrainians in front. The settlement is bordered to the west by a river behind which there's a soft river floodplain and then forests, ideal for retreat, impossible for attack or chase. And that's on top of everything else. I don't know who in command made this choice, but it's purely brilliant. So there's a lot of people, there's some people saying that this is really actually a tenable situation for the Ukrainians to hold Tekino going forward, and it's not just a raid. We'll see. It could be that they've been flushed out, and that actually most of the Ukrainian forces have been, or pro-Ukrainian forces have been pushed back out of Russia, and Surat Max might be broadly correct. I don't know, but I guess we'll see throughout the day. Now, interestingly, and annoyingly, Max 23 very rarely puts sources on here, and it frustrates the bejesus out of me and others. But Russia's offensive has been stopped, and its army is suffering heavy losses, according to Zelensky. And also it says that Ukraine will welcome trainers and technical personnel from NATO member countries. Now, I think this is coming from an interview with a French media outlet. So Ukraine's defense forces have stopped the Russian army's offensive in the eastern sector of the front line, and the situation there is better than it was 3 months ago, according to Zelensky in an interview with French journalists. Wow. So to think that Zelensky is now saying very publicly that the Russian offensive has stopped, that the Ukrainians have stopped it, is, I mean, I don't know if that's true. I don't know. I think we'll see further gains in the Avdiivka area, in the Novomykhailivka, Krasnohorivka area, Marinka regions, but I don't think they're going to be huge, and I think the Russians might well be struggling. I don't know. I don't know. Am I being too positive? I could be being too positive and swayed by what Zelensky is just asserting here. But if Putin is now coming out and threatening nuclear, then this is an indication that things aren't going well for the Russians. It's been a while, says no reports, but here we are again. Nuclear threats. Putin said that Russia is technically ready for nuclear war, but does not intend to start one. He said he never considered the use of nuclear tactical weapons in Ukraine. It is a bit of saber rattling here. It's like, hey, we're not going to start one, but we are ready and we've got nukes. Just a warning. So I think that is, again, a reflection of the problems I think that Russia is facing at the moment, both inside Russia with the drone and missile attacks, as well as on the ground in Ukraine. Right. Navalny's ex-chief of staff has reportedly been attacked near his home. Leonid Volkov, a former chief of staff of the late Russian oppositionist Alexei Navalny, was assaulted near his home in Lithuania. He was attacked with a hammer by all accounts. The first they smashed his car window and sprayed tear gas in his eyes. Police are on their way. I hope good health to him. So I spoke to another close associate of Navalny, Ivan Zhdanov. He told me there was one attacker who acted in silence, but he said, of course, this is a clear political attack. There is no doubt here. Many of Team Navalny moved to Vilnius for safety. This will be deeply worrying. A real shame that has happened. And then just a final piece on good old Twitter here, or X. Elon Musk's platform is still continuing to disadvantage pro-Ukrainian outlets or pro-Ukrainian voices. It says one here, yeah, me too, and I've seen at least 6 posts from other accounts I follow that got the same label. All people, all support Ukraine or are NAFO, right? So it appears that, and here's someone else saying they got me too, it makes no sense. They are being labelled as spam. So we have found that your account may contain spam or be engaging in other types of platform manipulation. You may not use X's services in a manner intended, blah, blah, blah. So people are being punished for effectively not being spam and for just being pro-Ukrainian, for being NAFO. And this is on the back of someone else here saying, Elmo didn't like yesterday's tweet praising the separatists in Kursk, got my account locked and labelled. So labelled again as spam. F Elmo. So Elmo is what people call Elon Musk, so they don't trigger like algorithms. Because, you're not allowed to insult Elon Musk, right? Without getting... Anyway, we know from last year that code was leaked, and that code showed that people who are pro-Ukraine and Ukraine news are downplayed in the algorithm. They're disadvantaged and seen as literally put in the same category as misinformation. And this is one way that there isn't freedom of speech on Twitter, despite him being a freedom of speech absolutist. He is disadvantaging people who are pro-Ukraine. He is advantaging people who are pro-Russia in terms of, like, they're the ones that overwhelmingly are paying for blue ticks that then get their voices amplified. And he stops community notes on his own disinformation claims about Ukraine. So him and David Sachs, his best mate, and who are just spreading Russian disinformation, then they're corrected by the community saying, actually, you haven't told the truth, and here's the truth, and then they get that deleted. And then the algorithm is also, that leaked code also shows that Elon Musk's own, and this is apparently in response to Joe Biden getting a more popular tweet than him, and he really annoyed him, that he then went to his coders and said, I want my voice to be amplified, which is, and I have seen this, and anyone that's joined Twitter in the last few months, who's the first person you hear about on Twitter? Who's the first handle that turns up in your feed? It's Elon Musk's every time. And I log on to Twitter, and Elon Musk's, what he says is like top of my Twitter feed, like, because he amplifies his own voice. In other words, it's not free. It is it's more free for some people than it is for others. There is not a complete freedom. There is certain voices that get amplified and other voices that get constrained and disadvantaged. And it falls along political lines, and it falls along geopolitical lines in terms of the war in Ukraine. So be under no illusions as to whose side Elon Musk is on. And I know I keep talking about this, but we have real examples and real evidence that this is happening in an intentional manner. So yeah, guy's a douche. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. Speak soon.